Okay, let's dive right in. Today we're unpacking insights from today's sources, looking at everything from, big geopolitical shifts and international law to education, some surprising environmental challenges, and global economics. It's quite a mix.
Absolutely. Lots of interconnected pieces, really.
Exactly. Let's start with this first piece from the editorial section. It's titled Resetting the India-U.S. Partnership in Uncertain Times. Now, it mentions that this relationship, once called the defining partnership of the 21st century, seems to be facing a, quote, perceptible drift. What's causing that feeling, that unease?
Well, the article points to a few worrying signals. One key thing is this return of hyphenation. The tendency to view India and Pakistan together as sort of equivalent strategic concerns.
Right, despite India working for years to decouple that view, to be seen on its own merits, its own trajectory.
Precisely. So seeing that creep back in is definitely a source of concern. And then there are other things like economic signals. There are reports, for instance, that Apple was maybe discouraged from significantly expanding its manufacturing footprint in India.
That's interesting. Why would that be?
The article doesn't delve deep into the why, but it presents it as another signal, another data point contributing to this feeling of drift. And perhaps most concerning from an Indian perspective is the mention of the U.S. Central Command referring to Pakistan as a phenomenal partner in counterterrorism.
Wow, phenomenal partner. That language definitely blurs lines, doesn't it? Given the history and India's own security concerns related to Pakistan.
It absolutely does. It creates significant disquiet, as the article puts it. It sort of muddies the waters regarding who the primary partners are and what the strategic priorities look like from the U.S. side, at least in that region.
So taking all these signals together, the hyphenation, the economic hesitations, the language around Pakistan, and what does this mean for the future? And what does the article suggest needs to happen for a reset? Is it a fundamental reset or?
That's a good question. It's less about resetting the fundamentals, the core interests, often still align, and more about resetting the tone and the commitment. The piece highlights what it calls structural asymmetries.
Asymmetries, how so?
Well, it suggests the U.S. approach can sometimes be quite transactional, focused on immediate quid pro quos, whereas India, the article argues, tends to have a more patient, long-term strategic culture.
Ah, so a clash of operational styles almost.
Kind of, yes. And this can lead to misunderstandings or frustrations. The core message seems to be that a reset requires mutual adjustment. The U.S. perhaps needs to move beyond older, almost Cold War-style frameworks and fully accept India's multi-aligned foreign policy approach.
Instead of trying to fit India into a simple ally or not ally box.
Exactly. And for India, the suggestion is a need to broaden its engagement, perhaps moving beyond just traditional government-to-government diplomacy, engaging more widely within the U.S. system. So it's about, adjusting expectations and communication on both sides.
Makes sense. A reset of tone and approach rather than foundations. Okay, let's shift gears. Moving from partnerships to conflicts and the law. Our second piece today, this one's from the opinion section, is called Israel's Actions in International Law, a Legal Analysis. This really dives into the legality, or lack thereof, of Israel's military strikes against Iran under international law. This gets complicated quickly, I imagine.
It certainly does. The absolute bedrock principle here is Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. It's fundamental. States cannot use force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state.
Right, the general prohibition on the use of force. But there are exceptions.
There are, but they're very narrow. The main one is self-defense, outlined in Article 51. But crucially, Article 51 typically requires an armed attack to have actually occurred.
Okay, so you need to be attacked first. But what about situations where a state feels an attack is coming? This idea of preemptive self-defense.
That's where the debate really heats up. The concept exists, but it's incredibly controversial and has a very, very high threshold under customary international law. The article really focuses on this.
So what is that threshold? How does the article define it, especially this idea of an imminent threat? Because that seems key.
Absolutely key. The article explains that for a claim of preemptive self-defense to be considered potentially lawful, the anticipated attack must be genuinely imminent. And imminent here doesn't just mean likely or possible soon. It draws on the classic Caroline Doctrine standard.
The Caroline Doctrine, can you remind us what that is?
Sure. It comes from a 19th century dispute, but it set the standard. It says the necessity for preemptive action must be instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation.
Wow. Okay. Instant, overwhelming, no choice, no time. That's an incredibly high bar.
It is. And the article argues that applying this to, say, Iran's nuclear program, claiming strikes are justified because the program might eventually lead to a weapon which might then be used well. Yeah. That requires a really expansive, arguably unsupported definition of imminent. It stretches the concept far beyond that Caroline test.
So the article is essentially saying that under established international law, the justification based on Iran's nuclear program doesn't meet the legal test for preemptive self-defense.
That seems to be the core legal analysis presented, yes. It emphasizes that despite, the cynicism we often see around international law, especially when powerful states are involved, it does remain the primary framework. States still feel the need to justify their actions legally, even if the interpretations are sometimes, let's say, creative. But the rules themselves, particularly around the use of force and imminence, are quite stringent according to this analysis.
It's a critical point the law exists, even if compliance and interpretation are debated.
Okay, let's move from international law to something closer to home for many listeners, perhaps, higher education. We're looking at the science section now with an article titled Foreign University Branches in India, Challenges and Outlook. There's been a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz about international universities setting up shop in India. What's the reality check here?
Well, there definitely is movement. The article notes that a few universities, mainly from Australia and the UK, have already established branches, often in places like Gift City in Gujarat, and more are apparently in the pipeline.
So the policy push is having some effect.
It seems so, yes. But the article raises some cautionary flags. It suggests that perhaps some institutions are moving a bit too fast, maybe rushing the process.
Rushing how?
For example, announcing admissions, sometimes even starting classes, before really crucial details are made public. Things like, who exactly the faculty will be, what their qualifications are, the specifics of the curriculum beyond the course title. That sounds potentially problematic. You'd want that transparency up front.
You absolutely would. Another concern highlighted is that many of the universities setting up branches aren't necessarily the absolute top-tier flagship institutions from their home countries. They might be perfectly respectable universities, but maybe not the Oxbridges or Harvards that perhaps some people initially envisioned.
Okay, so maybe managing expectations is important here.
Right. And the article warns there's a risk these branches could end up being perceived as, quote, diploma mills if they don't quickly establish a strong, distinct academic identity and reputation based on quality, not just on marketing or the foreign brand name alone.
That's a serious concern. So what does this mean for Indian students considering these options and maybe for the broader Indian higher education landscape? How do these new branches fit in?
Well, the article points out that India already has excellent institutions like the IITs for engineering and technology and the IIMs for management. These are world-class. Many of these new foreign branches seem to be focusing quite narrowly on high-demand vocational fields like business analytics, fintech, data science, things like that, which is fine, but it makes them potentially quite similar to many existing private colleges or specialized institutes already operating in India.
So maybe not offering something radically different in terms of subject matter.
Potentially not, in some cases. The real challenge, the article stresses, isn't just setting up the physical campus or the marketing campaign. It's building the soft infrastructure, the academic culture, the research environment, the quality of teaching, the student support. That's what truly defines a university's value.
And if that's lacking?
Then, the article suggests there's a real danger of eroding trust, both among students and the wider public. And that could actually hinder, rather than help, India's larger goal of internationalizing its higher education sector. It's about substance over civil, basically.
Substance over sizzle. A good way to put it. Okay, let's transition now to another, perhaps unexpected consequence of our interconnected world. This is from the text section, an article called Trade's Hidden Cargo, Invasive Alien Species. This piece reveals a really surprising and, frankly, quite alarming side effect of global trade. We're talking about unwanted passengers.
Yes, exactly. Harmful hitchhikers, as you said. The article uses a really striking example to illustrate the point. The giant African snail.
The giant African snail. I've heard of those. They're huge.
They are.
Yeah.
And apparently they were introduced to India, likely accidentally, sometime around 1847. Probably came in with timber shipments or other trade goods. And because quarantine measures back then were, pretty much non-existent or ineffective.
Loose.
It got loose, established itself, and became, according to the article, the country's most persistent and damaging invasive alien species. It absolutely devastates crops, It eats over 500 different types of plants, and it outcompetes native snail species. A real ecological nightmare, all starting from, likely, a few stowaways in a trade shipment.
Wow. That's a vivid example of how something seemingly small can have massive, long-lasting consequences. And the article connects this directly to increased global trade.
Yes, that's the core link. As global trade volumes increase, both the deliberate import of plants and animals and the opportunities for accidental introductions like the snail just go up dramatically. More ships, more planes, more cargo containers crisscrossing the globe means more pathways for these species to travel and invade new territories where they have no natural predators.
It's like opening biological floodgates almost. What's the scale of this problem specifically for India? The article mentions a financial cost.
It does, and the figure is pretty staggering. It estimates that invasive alien species have cost the Indian economy around $127.3 billion over the last 60 years. That's billion with a B.
Good grief, $127 billion. That's enormous.
It really is. The article states this makes India the second most financially affected country in the world by invasive species, second only to the United States. It highlights the huge, often hidden economic toll alongside the ecological damage.
So, given this massive cost and the ecological threat, what can actually be done? What does the article suggest?
It advocates for a much more robust and proactive approach. Key recommendations include significantly strengthening national biosecurity measures, better inspection, better quarantine protocols at ports and airports. Also, implementing real-time tracking systems to detect new invasions early when they're easier to manage.
Catching them before they spread widely.
Exactly. And it pushes for something called a One Biosecurity Framework. This means integrating efforts across different sectors, agriculture, environment, health, because these species often impact all of them. It's about breaking down silos and having a unified national strategy.
Especially, as the article notes, with projections that global freight transport could triple by 2050, the pressure is only going to increase, isn't it?
Precisely. The core message is that this isn't a marginal issue. It's a major economic and environmental threat that requires serious, coordinated, and forward-looking action now. We need a stronger defense against these hidden cargoes.
A very sobering perspective. Okay, sticking with the text section, our next article brings us back to geopolitics and economics, specifically focusing on energy markets. It asks, why are oil prices rising amid Iran-Israel war? And it points to one very specific, very critical geographical location.
Yes, it zeroes in on the Strait of Hormuz. The recent tensions and attacks involving Iran and Israel have definitely pushed Brent crude futures higher, creating volatility in the oil markets. But the underlying fear, the big risk factor looming over the market, is the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Remind us why Hormuz is so incredibly important.
It's essentially a bottleneck, a very narrow channel of water, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the wider Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, and the amount of oil that passes through it is just immense.
How much are we talking about?
The article states it handles the transportation of roughly one-fifth, about 20% of the entire world's consumption of petroleum liquids, and about a quarter of the global supply of oil passes through it, plus a significant amount of liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Wow. 1/5 of consumption, 1/4 of supply. It really is a choke point. And Iran has threatened to close it.
Repeatedly, yes. Over the years, particularly during times of high tension, Iranian officials have made threats about potentially disrupting or closing the strait. Whether they could actually do it effectively for a sustained period is debated, but the mere threat is enough to rattle markets significantly.
So what would happen if it were closed or even just significantly disrupted? What are the global implications?
The immediate impact would be chaos for shipping. Tankers would face huge delays they'd have to reroute, likely taking much longer and more expensive journeys if alternative routes are even viable for that volume. Shipping costs and insurance premiums would skyrocket.
And that translates directly to higher energy prices for consumers.
Absolutely. Reduced supply, or even just the perception of reduced supply and higher transport costs, inevitably leads to higher prices at the pump and for heating oil, and ripples through the entire global economy. The article does note that technically global oil markets seem reasonably well supplied if there's no major disruption, but the geopolitical risk premium is very high right now.
How is India positioned in all this? We import a lot of oil, don't we?
We do. India is one of the world's largest crude oil importers. Now, the article points out that India has actually diversified its import sources quite a bit in recent years and doesn't currently import oil directly from Iran due to sanctions.
Okay, so we're not directly reliant on Iran itself?
Not directly, no.
No.
But that doesn't insulate India from the impact of a Hormuz disruption.
Mm.
If global oil prices spike because of tensions or closure of the Strait, India still has to pay those higher global prices for the oil it imports from other countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Russia, or the U.S.
Right, we're part of the global market, so we feel the global price shock regardless of the specific source.
Exactly. Higher crude import costs put pressure on India's trade balance, can fuel inflation, impact the profitability of industries reliant on energy, and ultimately affect overall economic growth. So stability in the Strait of Hormuz is critically important for India's economic health, even without direct Iranian imports.
A vital lifeline, then. Okay, for our final deep dive today, let's turn our attention to the oceans and international cooperation. We're looking at the outcomes of the recent UN Oceans Conference, specifically focusing on progress, or lack thereof, on the High Seas Treaty. What was the main goal here, and what did the conference achieve?
The big picture goal of the UN Oceans Conference, or UNOC, was really to inject urgency and accelerate action on protecting the world's oceans, which are facing, multiple crises, pollution, overfishing, climate change
It's a
impacts.
huge and daunting task.
Immense.
Yeah.
A major focus within that was the BBNJ agreement that stands for Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. It's more commonly known as the High Seas Treaty.
Right. The treaty aimed at protecting marine life in international waters, areas beyond any single country's control.
Precisely. These are vast areas, covering nearly two-thirds of the ocean. The treaty aims to establish tools for conservation, like setting up marine protected areas, MPAs, in the high seas. This ties into the broader global commitment, often called 30 by 30, to conserve at least 30% of the planet's land and marine areas by the year 2030.
Okay, so a really ambitious and important treaty. What's its current status? Did the conference get it over the line?
It got very close. The treaty text itself was agreed upon previously, and around 160 countries have signed it, signaling their intent. But for it to become legally binding international law, it needs to be formally ratified by at least 60 countries.
And where are we on ratifications?
Going into the conference, the number was lagging, but the article reports that during UNOC, several more countries completed their ratification process, bringing the total up to 56.
Oh, wow. Just 4 short of the 60 needed. That's significant progress.
It really is. It means the treaty is now on the cusp of entering into force, which is a major milestone for ocean governance. However,
There's always a however, isn't there?
often, yes. While getting the ratifications is crucial, the article highlights that the most difficult, the most contentious aspect of the treaty still needs to be fully ironed out in practice. And that's the issue of sharing the benefits derived from marine genetic resources, or MGRs.
Marine genetic resources. What are those exactly?
Think of organisms found in the deep sea, often around hydrothermal vents or other unique environments. They might contain genetic material or biochemical compounds that could be incredibly valuable for medicine, biotechnology, cosmetics, you name it, things we haven't even discovered yet.
Ah, so potentially valuable discoveries in international waters. Who gets to benefit from them?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, literally. Developing countries argue that these resources are the common heritage of humankind, and any benefits, financial or otherwise, should be shared equitably. Developed nations and private companies, who often have the technology to explore and exploit these resources, are concerned about how benefit-sharing mechanisms might impact innovation and investment. Finding a fair and practical system for this is proving extremely challenging.
I can see why that would be sticky. Despite that challenge, were there other positive outcomes from the conference?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond the treaty ratification progress, the article mentions significant voluntary commitments made by countries and organizations. For example, the European Commission pledged €1 billion for ocean conservation initiatives, and French Polynesia made a huge pledge to create what would be the world's largest marine protected area within its waters.
So even with the tricky negotiations on MGRs, there's still momentum and real money being put towards ocean protection.
Definitely. There's a clear sense of urgency and a lot of activity. But the article leaves us with that critical question hanging. How do we balance the urgent need to explore and potentially utilize these unique marine resources for medicine, for science, with the equally urgent need to conserve fragile high seas ecosystems and ensure any benefits are shared fairly? That balancing act, especially around MGRs, seems to be the make-or-break challenge for the long-term success of this whole ambitious effort.
It's a crucial question indeed, balancing use and preservation on a global scale. That brings us to the end of our sources for today. Thank you for listening. If today's deep dive gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting us on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.